Ahoy Captains, it's Vaz again with another Versus video from the game World of Warships Legends. And if you're not familiar with how we do Versus around here, I'll let you know. In Versus we compare two similar and readily available ships to determine if one is better than the other. We'll tally the points up as we go along, and at the end we'll hope to determine a winner. We'll also throw in a little bit of information and some tips on the builds and play styles of these ships. Today we have two American legendary tier cruisers, the Alaska and the Worcester. And both of these ships can only be obtained through the Bureau. First up, a little bit of info on these ships. The Alaska was commissioned in 1944, while the Worcester was commissioned in 1948. Both ships were the lead ships in their respective classes. Next up, let's talk about the playstyle of these ships. Due to their lack of torps, you want to play both ships at range when in open water, especially the Worcester, due to it being a big target with very little armor. You also want to find cover as close to the action as possible in order to take advantage of their radar consumable to detect enemy destroyers for your team. You can play the Alaska a bit more aggressively though due to its excellent armor. It is a battlecruiser after all, so being next to an island to reduce the chance of a crossfire while battle tanking is definitely the way to go. For both of these ships I recommend Norman Scott as a commander because of how versatile he is. You can come up with completely different builds using his skills. It is important to save your promotion orders and insignias where you can, so unless you're swimming in resources, you can avoid using them on Kincaid altogether. I have been experimenting with the premium commander Shelley Beepley, but when it comes to legendary tiered American cruisers, Scott is really all you need. On Alaska I choose all the offensive skills and fully packed for the legendary skill for an extra set of consumables. On the Worcester I've gone with more of a mobility build which was recommended to me through a video by JetsFan01. I'll link the video now because it really helps improve my gameplay in the Worcester once I tried it. When it comes to the legendary skill, I do switch between fully packed and EOP depending on how the last battle went for me. I find it hard to choose between the two as the extra consumables can be really handy if you find yourself in a close match with very few ships left, but equilibrium of power can be very helpful for wearing down all those legendary tier battleships you'll undoubtedly encounter. Try them both out and see which one works best for you. As for inspirations, there are a ton of options for these ships. I personally like to use Membelli to reduce the reload time and Kuznetsov to increase the range. Other good options for the Alaska are Yamamoto, Luchins, or Von Essen, and for the Worcester, Macau, Rue, or even Lemonnier. Let's next run through all the upgrade slots. Both ships have 4 starting upgrade slots. Starting with slot 1, the options are Aiming Systems Mod 1, AA Guns Mod 2, Main Battery Mod 2, and on the Alaska, Secondary Battery Mod 2. For both of these ships I recommend Aiming Systems Mod 1 to help with their accuracy. If you do find that your accuracy is pretty good, you could also go with AA Guns Mod 2 as aircraft carriers are becoming more frequent in the game. Now why doesn't the Worcester have a secondary battery mod? Well, we'll discuss that in just a few moments. But until then, let's go over Mod Slot 2. The options are Steering Gears Mod 2, Propulsion Mod 2, and Damage Control System Mod 2. I go with Propulsion for Alaska because I hate being a sitting duck for torps and such a large ship, and Steering Gears for the Worcester to continue my agile build. Next up, the choices for Slot 3 are Steering Gears Mod 3, Concealment System Mod 1, and Target Acquisition Mod 1. This one isn't as straightforward, although Steering Gears to maximize the Worcester's agility is the top choice. Concealment is also a decent option though. All 3 options would work on the Alaska, but I chose Concealment Systems for that extra 5% of incoming fire dispersion. And now the final mod slot, Slot 4. The options are AA Guns Mod 3, Gunfire Control System Mod 2, and Main Battery Mod 3. The Alaska also has the additional option of the Secondary Battery Mod 3. It's another tough choice, but for the Worcester I went with range since the reload doesn't make much of a difference. But with the Alaska it does make a bigger difference, and so I did go with the Main Battery Mod to better its reload and DPM. Now let's move over to the loadout screen. Everything on this screen is identical except one thing. Not only does the Alaska have one additional repair party, but it heals nearly twice as much per second and has a much shorter reload time. This nets at the first point of the matchup already. Alright, let's move over to everybody's favorite screen, the stat screen. I've put a commander on each ship to reduce their stats to their base as much as possible, but there are a few mods that are still going to skew some of the stats, so I'll point those out as we move along. The first category in the stat screen is survivability. The Alaska has over 9,000 more hit points than the Worcester, and combined with its larger healing, that means that it gets another point for having a larger hit point pool. We're gonna save the armor for the armor viewer, and as for the torpedo damage reduction, it's very close, but the 6% difference of the average torpedo hit is gonna be about 1,000 or so, and any more than a couple of hits and you're dead anyways, so no point unfortunately. Alright, hang on to your hats and glasses because things are going to get hectic on the artillery screen. First off, the Alaska gets a point for having larger caliber guns, allowing it for more penetrations at different angles and increased penetrations. The next order of business is the firing range. The Alaska gets a point just barely for having a better firing range by more than half a kilometer because the actual base range of the Worcester is only 15.3. Also, just get this out of the way now, the Alaska's reload time is actually 20 seconds and its turret traverse is 30 seconds. All those stats were affected by some of the mods on the upgrade screen. I hope you enjoyed my little handwritten edits there. I only did them for this screen because I thought it was kind of important. Next up, let's talk about the turret traverse. The Worcester gets its first point of the matchup for having a quicker turret traverse speed. It also gets 3 more points here, one for a better fire chance per minute, another for better HE shells damage per minute, and finally it evens up the matchup with better AP DPM. We're not quite through on this screen though, and whew, I am out of breath because the Alaska gets a 5th point for having better secondaries. In fact, the Worcester doesn't even have secondaries. And speaking of not having stuff, these are both high-tier American cruisers, so neither of them have torpedoes. That means we can move right on to anti-aircraft defense. The AA defense screen is one of the more interesting ones to break down as the Alaska's damage per second is quite a bit higher than the Worcester's. But pretty much all of it only reaches out to 3.5 kilometers or less, while the bulk of the Worcester's AA extends to 5 kilometers, with some guns even reaching out to 6 kilometers. This means that the larger AA bubble of the Worcester is much deadlier, hence the higher AA rating in the game. This will net at a point in our matchup, evening things up yet again. Let's maneuver on over to maneuverability. These ships have the exact same speed, so let's take a look at the agility stats. The actual base rudder shift of the Worcester is 9.2 seconds. Again, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a screen of the base. Anyhow, it's still going to get a point for agility because its rudder is quite a bit lower and its turning circle is a little tighter too. Hey, look at this, the Worcester's in the lead now. Can it hold it though? Let's take a look at the concealment screen. The Alaska's base detection by sea is actually 13.3, and this is the final instance where I was unable to get a screen of the base stat. This is an unfortunate downside of Bureau ships. You can't see their base stats until you unlock them. Anyways, it does mean that the Worcester's concealment is better by half a click, but at these distances I wouldn't call that an advantage, although it is close. If we were comparing destroyers that had half a kilometer concealment advantage, then that's significant, but not really here. Again, it's very close. Next, let's look at the armor viewer. Both of these ships have nice 32mm bows, but that's where the fun stops for the Worcester. Its armor everywhere else is lacking compared to the Alaska, especially that side armor. This gives the Alaska another point for better armor, tying up this versus for the very last time. What's gonna be our tiebreaker? Well, technically it could be anything on this list, but our final screen is going to be the Citadel comparison. The Alaska Citadel sits nicely right below the waterline and is protected by a thick outer armor, while the Worcester Citadel is well above the waterline and is completely exposed with no outer protective plating. That gives the Alaska the final point of the matchup and the win. What a great battle! Alright, well let's review everything in the summary. The Alaska gets 7 points for a better repair party, more hit points, a higher shell caliber, better range, for having secondaries, for better armor, and for better Citadel protection. While the Worcester ended up with 6 points for better turret traverse, better high explosive DPM, better armor piercing DPM, better fire chances per minute, better AA, and better agility. This was a real tough versus for me to go through since there were so many differences and close calls, but there's no way I was going to go through one of these just to let it end in a tie. I'd love to give them both the win here, but I don't believe in ties, come on! If I had to lay it all on the line here, I'd say that the range versus concealment is what it came down to, where the Worcester beat the Alaska in concealment by only 500 meters, while the Alaska's range was superior by 700 meters. And even though I called the Alaska a winner in this comparison of stats, I don't view the Worcester as a loser at all, just an extremely close second. In closing, wow, that was a slugfest. The recent buffs to the Worcester really have made it competitive, and really you can't go wrong with either of these choices if you commit to their respective playstyles. With the Des Moines being added as another American legendary cruiser recently, we may have another comparison on the horizon. Stay tuned. Well, that does it for this video. If you did enjoy it, please hit that thumbs up button for me. If you want to see more of my videos, hit that subscribe button. Feel free to leave a comment down below, and as always, take care of yourself and do what makes you happy.